Welcome. Thank you for joining the Population Health Innovation Lab, known as PHIL, for the second session in our three-part series, Improving Population Health Through Multi-Sector Collaboration. Today's session is Getting Real with the Experts, Community Stories of Aligning. You should have just received a notice from Zoom too, but just so you know, today's event will be recorded. So please make sure that you're muted during the presentation. And a copy of the presentation and the slides, of the recording and the slides will be available on the PHIL website following the event. And to start us off, I will pass it to Sue. I believe Sue, you're taking over?
Great.
Sue,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, very good. Thank you so much, Becca. And welcome, everybody. We're excited to be here with you today and glad we all ended up in the same room eventually. This is the second of three events in our Improving Population Health Through Multi-Sector Collaboration series. Our first session was held on May 24th, and we focused on the secret sauce, the top three things to do when aligning systems for health. Today, our second session is where we're going to really get real with those who are operating an ACH or an accountable community of or for health. In Washington and California, we have a total of 4 panelists, and they're going to provide concrete examples of how they have implemented and worked with their community and their ACH on those top 3 secret sauce items. So we're excited for this. And then our third and last session in the series will be on June 15th, and it's going to focus on sharing the repository of all of the lessons learned from aligning. And we know that you have a choice in how you spend your time, and we're grateful that you chose to be here today to hear the stories of the hard work with communities. Next slide. So our agenda today is like we're welcoming you in. We'll do a brief intro to who PHIL is, or the Population Health Innovation Lab. We're going to do a brief recap. Stephanie Bultema is going to do a brief recap for those of you that weren't at the first session, so you kind of understand the context. And then I'm going to turn it over to Christina Olson, who's going to introduce our panelists that are here with us today, that are going to be sharing 4 different examples of how they've implemented that secret sauce. We will not be going into breakout rooms. We're going to allow the opportunity for everybody to be in dialogue, Q&A together. And our objectives for this event are to describe at the end of this, describe the top 3 things to do when aligning systems for health, that's secret sauce, and provide at least one example of how a secret sauce element has been operationalized in a multi-sector collaborative. And also just for you to be in dialogue with each other and learn with each other about what you're learning. Next slide. So while we are meeting today on a virtual platform, I just want to acknowledge the importance of the land. And the Population Health Innovation Lab team respectfully acknowledges that we live and operated on the unceded land of Indigenous people throughout the U.S. And that acknowledgement is just the beginning, and that acknowledgement and the time required to do it with integrity should be an invitation for us all to do deeper analysis, relationship building, and action. And we invite you to learn more about how to go to really learn, if you don't know, the land that you are occupying through the link that we're going to put in the chat. We also have a couple of resources that might be really helpful if you're looking to go, how do I go beyond land acknowledgement? So it's Beyond Land Acknowledgement, a guide. So that's just an offering for you. Thank you. Next slide. And just a little bit about us. So the Population Health Innovation Lab, or PHIL, is a program at the Public Health Institute, and we design, catalyze, and accelerate innovative approaches that advance health, well-being, and equity. And for us, what we care most about, right, is supporting the success and impact of health-focused multi-sector collaboratives. And we offer a set of services that we have learned are useful and most impactful for those that we work with. So these health-focused multi-sector collaboratives and or ACHs. So we do communication support, developing the startup and the nurturing of an MSC, meeting design and facilitation, research, of which you're going to be hearing a bit about, any kind of technical assistance related to that, and training and learning opportunities. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Sue. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Boltema. I'm Director of Merlin and Phil, and I'm going to give you just a brief overview of what we talked about in part 1 of this series. Next slide, please. So if you weren't able to join us for part 1, we have that video, we have the slides posted on our website. If someone on the Phil team could put that in the chat, please. That is available for you to check out, but I'm going to provide you just a very high-level overview of what we talked about. And this sets the stage for our amazing panelists who are going to bring this to life today. So where this all started, where it's coming from, is with some Aligning Systems for Health with ACH's research that Phil's been conducting for the last few years. This research set out to explore how collaboration and alignment among public health, healthcare, and social service sectors in partnership with community residents and tribal nations leads to outcomes in 22 accountable communities of or for health, or ACHs, in Washington and California. So on this slide, you see up top in the upper right-hand corner, the ACHs in Washington highlighted. And in Washington, ACHs go by Accountable Community of Health, which is why we have the of for. In California, down at the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the 13 original ACHs. There's some exciting changes with CACHI sites in California, where there's going to be a big expansion of ACHs upcoming. Congratulations to CACHI, this is amazing. And in California, ACHs go by Accountable Communities for Health. And so that's why we do the of for. But next slide, please. So since everyone might not be as familiar with this idea of the ACH model, I want to speak to this just very briefly and let you all know that at a very high level, ACHs are health-focused multi-sector collaboratives, or MSCs, that create shared responsibility and accountability for the health of a community. So down at the bottom of this screen, you see a beautiful graphic created by the Funders Forum on Accountable Health, where they've outlined the essential elements of ACHs. And you see that this is a pretty complex endeavor that ACHs undertake. There's a lot going on here. But there are these kind of common elements across ACHs, where ACHs have a shared vision. They bring their community around a vision that they're all committed to working to achieve together. They have structured governance and supportive leadership that stewards this work. And then you'll see in the center of this graphic that equity spans everything else that happens in an ACH. And this is important to have these essential elements because it's also important to understand that every single ACH is different, that states take slightly different approaches to implementing the ACH model, and that every single ACH takes a slightly different approach to implementing this model. But that there are these common elements. And so you'll see some of this today from our panelists, both these commonalities across ACH communities, as well as similarities. So the other thing I want to say about the ACH is included in this study is that, the study, the Aligning Systems for Health research, is really about how can multi-sector collaboration for population health improvement be done well. We didn't set out specifically to study, say, the ACH model. We chose to work with ACHs because from our experience and practice, we saw that ACHs were a really promising example for how aligning systems for health can be done, and believed, and through this research saw, that really the ACH approach to aligning systems for health is something that all multi-sector collaboratives can learn from. And so we're really honored to be able to share what we've learned from ACHs through this research. But since we are seeking to generalize what we've learned from ACHs to other multi-sector collaboratives, I do think it's important to note just a couple of things that might be different about ACHs than just any multi-sector collaborative. With the first thing being that they're community-based. And so each ACH serves a specific geographic area. In Washington, ACHs serve either single counties or multi-county regions. In California, they serve neighborhoods, cities, or counties. And ACHs also have a staffed backbone function, meaning that they have dedicated support to steward aligning, to steward this kind of multi-sector collaboration. And that's huge. And then the final thing that I want to note is that so far, all of the states that have implemented the ACH model have some level of state support for this model. That looks different from state to state, but that kind of state level sponsorship and support is really important and is tied to each state that's formally implemented the ACH model so far. So now that I hope you have a little bit of an understanding of this research, a little bit of an understanding of ACHs, if you didn't already, next slide, please. And let's just do a quick review of those 3 things to do when aligning systems for improved population health. So we are saying from everything that we've learned through this research that if you're going to focus on anything when seeking to align systems for improved population health, please make sure that these 3 things are included in what you are emphasizing. The first being including diverse and representative perspectives in decision-making. Second, using equitable and inclusive arrangements. And third, ensuring the collaborative work produces observable benefits. So we tried really hard to simplify what we learned into these 3 key things, but we recognize these are still really big ideas. And so I'm so excited to hear from our panelists today who are going to bring these things to life, who are going to show you what this looks like on the ground and what their own journey with bringing these things to their communities has looked like. So with that, I will pass it over to Christina, who is going to introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much. So now is the time when we are really excited to transition to you all hearing from those who are doing this phenomenal work on the ground, the real people that we consider experts, and they have a whole variety of colleagues that are supporting them in this work. I know sometimes they don't like the words experts, but we believe that they are experts. So we are excited for you to hear from them today. Some of what we heard from that first session is like, yeah, these are huge concepts. Like these secret sauce elements are so big. How do we do this? Where do we even start? There's so many ways that this could happen. And so today we're excited to have these experts give context to that. These secret sauce elements don't look the same in any one community. There is so much variety in how they can get implemented. There are lots of lessons learned, and it's a process and it's an evolution over time. For so many of these communities. So today we have 4 panelists who are going to share with you all today a little bit more about their work on the ground in accountable communities of or for health. We have 2 sites that are representing Washington accountable communities, and then we have 2 that are from California accountable communities. So what we're going to do in terms of format here is that we will have our 4 panelists presenting. We are going to hold for official vocal Q&A until the end, but I would highly encourage you all, if you have questions for a panelist, go ahead and just put that in the chat as they're presenting so you don't forget about those things. We'll be tracking that. And as much as they're able to, they will try to respond to those things at a later point. And we will gather those as well so that we can have a productive question and answer kind of discussion session after all 4 panelists present. So we are going to start now with Charisse Pope. Charisse is the Director of Health Integration at Better Health Together. The Director of Health Integration at Better Health Together. Charisse grew up in Eastern Washington and has over 25 years of nonprofit and social service experience. She has a variety of experience in social services and business sectors, having worked as a therapist with adolescent girls, supporting the work of others as an administrator, and working as the chair of County Health Services with the Spokane County Regional Support Network, where she oversaw tons of things for a provider network for several years, and has also worked as a chief business officer at Excelsior. In 2018, Charisse joined Better Health Together and has been leading community and regional initiatives centered on improving access to healthcare. In her free time, she loves being at home with family, weekend outings, and playing with her sidekick dog. Charisse, we're so excited to have you today. Thank you so much for joining.
Great. Thanks so much, Christina, and good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be with like-minded folks. and folks who are really interested in an accountable community of health model and how are we doing the work. And that's really just wonderful to be in the same space with all of you. So looking forward to the discussion. And like Christina was saying, please feel free to ask questions. And as much as I can answer, I would be happy to do so. So let's dive in if you don't mind. Next slide, please. So we're going to take a look at some of our rural work in our rural counties. And next slide. And so if you look at the state of Washington, we are in that northeastern corner up here, and there's quite a lot of variety. So Spokane County, and that's where Better Health Together resides. That's where we're centered at in the city of Spokane. And our county is the largest in Eastern Washington at just over 500,000 people. But we work with and support our surrounding counties. So Pend Oreille, Stevens, Ferry, Lincoln, and Adams counties, and they range in population greatly. So Ferry is our smallest with 7,200 individuals. Stevens and Adams are around 20,000 individuals each. Lincoln is around 10,000 and Pend Oreille is around 15 to 18,000. So quite a variety. I am not going to hit on Spokane County today necessarily. If you folks have questions about the work that we've done, happy to answer. But because there's such a difference between rural and Spokane, just focusing on rural today. So next slide, please. So as you folks know, healthcare is local, and that's pretty. The data supports that. I think just community supports that. So we are really focusing on our counties as local collaboratives. So we're going to take a look at the development of those, how they came to the needs that they identified, some of the approaches that they're using, share a little bit of success, lessons learned, and certainly opportunities, especially around data and how to use data better. Next slide, please. So absolutely a collaborative approach, and Better Health Together became an accountable community health in about 2013-14. And some of these collaboratives within these counties that I showed you on that map slide had already been in place for many years. The Lincoln County Collaborative, interestingly enough, has been in existence for over 25 years. So it wasn't necessarily us coming into these counties and saying, okay, now you need to organize yourselves around a collaborative concept or approach. It was really just supporting what was already there. And those of you who work with rural counties or rural communities, you know, there's community there, and they are there to help and support each other, and they come together regularly to meet community needs. So we came in as partners, and we came in just to support the work that they wanted to accomplish. You know, one of the challenges that many of these collaboratives had was that they had these initiatives and ideas that they wanted to do that they, felt would improve the health and well-being of their community members, but they didn't have the funding to do that. And as Stephanie was saying during her set up her presentation this morning, they didn't have the bandwidth or the people power to really make some of these things work. And so Better Health Together has been able to support and work with these counties in regards to not only providing some funding, but also braiding some funding through other resources. And then for those communities and counties that they just didn't have the bandwidth to, convene and facilitate, we actually have project managers who work with those counties and around these initiatives to help support that work and get it moving and going. Next slide, please. So a little bit, just more of contextual background. We do work with the Center for Outcomes Research and Education, or CORE. That's a Providence division, and they really help us wrap our arms around, how do we plan, monitor, and evaluate some of these community health projects and initiatives. Like I said, just a few seconds ago, we did provide funding. We also look for opportunities to braid other funding to support some of these projects. And then with CORE, we've been able to, again, evaluate and have at our disposal, in some cases, some data that we normally would not have had. And we've also used the Wilder Collaborative Inventory, so a tool that's used to assess partnership and cooperation among collaborative members. And I'll show you that at the end of the slide deck here. So next slide, please. So a little bit on the process that we've embarked on with our collaborative partners. So, and this is, I can't say this enough, but this is community driven. So the community in Ferry County, for instance, is very multi-sector, and they are the ones who decide what they would like to work on. It is not Better Health Together in Spokane. And there is a very real divide between rural and urban in our area. So, again, we come at this as partners. We want their community to be healthier. And so that's how we approach the work. Again, facilitating and convening if they would like us to. But again, they are the local community. They live there. They are the local experts. So they identify and prioritize their issues. Then they work on specific strategies, and then they develop an implementation plan. At that point, we have CORE come in, really look at measurement, and develop, again, a communication plan, work on how we're going to implement and track the progress of these projects, and then always review and refine, right? So these were probably steps that are not unfamiliar to any of you, but again, just wanted to share the approach that we work with and support with these collaborative partners. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at what our county partners and friends have been working on. And, with a lot of our work, I hate to say, COVID impacted, but COVID-19 significantly impacted a lot of these projects and the work that these counties have tried to implement. So they may have started, a lot of these projects started planning and looking at data 2019, and then COVID hit, and so they really had to adjust. And you will see, I think, in the Wilder survey, and then just some follow-up at the end, lessons learned. Some of these counties, COVID-19 really brought the community closer together and really brought them around their specific initiatives. In other counties, it has been it has created more challenges in regards to relationships. And so, I don't believe that's any different than anywhere else around the country. But just want to share that really added a dynamic, my apologies, that obviously none of us could have expected or planned for, certainly not in 2019. So, and you'll see some themes here. So in Adams County, a priority issue was increasing access to primary care and really behavioral health. And one of their key tactics, if you will, or strategies, was to really get a robust community health needs assessment process for the county. Adams County is an interesting county in the sense that it has a portion of the population that is Latinx, and it has quite another portion of its community who are typical wheat farmers. And so it is a county that has some dynamics that have been challenging to get some of these projects going. They are also one that struggles with just facilitating and collaborating and bringing partners together. But they have resolved, and the community health needs assessment is going to be their primary driver as they go forward. Ferry County, their top issue was suicide prevention, and they implemented a strategy to provide free QPR, and QPR is question Persuade and Refer, for those of you who may not be familiar, training for community members. And they offered that widely across their county. They are also currently doing a paramedicine feasibility study. And yesterday I just received an email. Wow, time goes by fast. So I'm going to talk really fast. I got the 2-minute mark. So, but just received an email from them that they just got awarded a HRSA grant to implement their paramedicine project that they have been planning for at least a couple of years. And then they also secured pallet houses for emergency housing. A lot of our counties are really susceptible to wildfires, probably not any dissimilar than folks in California. So I'm going to let you probably read the rest of these. You probably have as I've been talking, but as you will see with each of these counties, their priorities and then their tactics are very different. And that again reflects back to the community and the collaborative members that are within those. So next slide, please. So this is the Wilder survey results. And again, not going to focus hugely on this, but it's a survey tool that we used with our collaborative members because we just wanted to get some feedback on, how did they feel the collaborative was working. So it includes strengths. They see that, there's skilled leadership, mutual respect, understanding, and trust amongst the collaborative members, which is huge and wonderful. They want to look at future development, continuous learning, and the collaborative is really seen as a legitimate leader in their community. So really impacting change, and folks in the community can see that. And then there's also opportunities, right? The opportunities to leverage the skills and successes across county collaboratives and support each other as they go forward. Next slide, please. And so just a little bit more, the relationships and trust are huge amongst these collaboratives, and COVID-19 really had some varying results on some of these counties and collaboratives. So again, some of these, a couple of our county collaboratives are really, having to work on relationships, and others, COVID-19 really brought them together as a stronger group and collaborative. They really coalesced around the community and the community's well-being. Next slide, please. So, the goals of why have a collaborative, why bring them together? And, you folks will probably agree 100%. The healthcare is local, right? So, sharing and hearing about community resources and efforts, it's an opportunity to network, they can learn together, and then they can frankly just come together for collective impact. And that's the real win. The collective impact has just been huge. And for one of our counties, Ferry County, which is the smallest one, if you remember back to that mapping slide, 7,200 folks, they have become their own 501c3. And so they have been able to use that, like I just shared, to go after HRSA grants and now be awarded. So you'll see that, these collaborators are in varying degrees of operational, if you will, and has Better Health Together there to support those efforts, regardless of where they are on that spectrum. But being really respectful of where they are on that spectrum as well. Again, partner, right? Next slide, please. And so, kind of coming back to Phil and all the wonderful work that they've done and continue to support across ACHs. So, data and learning and measuring impact, there's always opportunities. There's always the opportunity to learn more about how to use data, how to identify, those areas where there's gaps and how to be impactful with those gaps. Developing a plan, together, that measuring impact. These are not things that community groups typically have the skill set for. So again, that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity, and certainly a challenge, but in the long run, a greater opportunity. And they want to be able to measure the impact of their work. And then also, though, be able to measure, the impact of relationships and collective conversations. And so really bringing in a more robust picture of what are we capturing with data, and does that reflect about a collaborative or community collaborative? So with that, I'm sure I'm over my 10 minutes. There's so much to share, and would be happy to answer any questions that you folks have. So thank you so much for your time. It's really an honor and privilege to be with you and be able to present this. So thank you.
Therese, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and just sharing more about the phenomenal work that Better Health Together is involved in. We are going to transition now to our second panelist. Again, we will be sourcing questions here in the chat. There's some links also being shared there for other information that may be of value and use to you all in your work as multi-sector groups. So now we're going to hear from Peggy Agron. She is the West Sacramento Accountable Community for Health lead at the Health Education Council, which is a community-based organization dedicated to cultivating health in underserved communities by leveraging power of collaboration. Peggy previously served as the National Director of Kaiser Permanente's Thriving Schools Initiative, where she launched a national effort committed to helping shape schools to be healthy and vibrant places of learning and development. She also has experience working at the California Department of Health, where she was the lead of obesity prevention and school health. And she has a master's degree in nutrition and a bachelor's degree in sociology. Welcome, Peggy. We're so excited to hear from you all and the work that you're doing.
Great, thank you. We can go to the first slide. I'm very happy to be here and to share the lessons learned. For those of you that don't know California geography, West Sacramento is a city of about a little over 50,000 that is part of Yolo County, and we are just literally over a bridge from our capital, Sacramento. We have been we play this backbone role you've been hearing about, and we have been part of two learning communities, the California Accountable Community for Health Initiative, better known as CACHI, as well as the cross-sector innovation initiative that was an initiative funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We can go to the next slide. This is just a picture of who we are, who's around the table, we do keep adding. So this is a dynamic picture. You can see we have community residents up there. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it really begins with who you invite to your table. So the table is very important. Next slide. So it was interesting to hear the top 3 factors that we've been hearing about that contribute to the aligning. And I just want to say it's not a surprise to us because we have learned this on our own, and it is very much represented in the core values of our ACH. And we can go to the next slide. And these are the core values. When the ACH first formed, there was a significant amount of time building trust, building partnerships, developing core values, governance, and all of those things, which are so important to be done before you really dive into work, so that you're all comfortable working together, understand each other, know each other's languages. So these were the core values we came up with. And you've been hearing these words before: equity, inclusivity, accountability, which is really being transparent and open, particularly to the communities you're serving and impacting. Community engagement was a very early important value, and I'm going to speak mostly to that particular effort as I talk today. And of course, you've been hearing also collective impact, that it's more than coming to the table and sharing, but thinking about how the work can be more impactful by the organizations coming together and working in a different way. Next slide. So this picture kind of just depicts the process of our work. And, you know, we start with digging into data, then we move into really listening deeply, selecting focus areas, committing to action, and how that kind of shifted, I'm going to talk a little bit about during the pandemic. So we, you know, the first thing we really had to do was come together and look at the data. What's happening in West Sacramento that's, and where in West Sacramento? What are the communities most negatively being impacted? What data is different than the rest of the county, the rest of the state? And then we as a group of organizations came up with focusing initially on heart disease. That's where the data pointed to us. And then we had to go through a process. Well, what does that mean? What risk factors are we going to dive deeper into? And then we kind of said we have to stop because we're doing this without as much resident input as we need to have. So we stopped and we went out and we met with residents, and we did this in a variety of ways, but particularly we brought together what we call community connectors. And community connectors are residents living in the neighborhoods where we're trying to do our work and that are looked at as leaders, and they're engaged in multiple community activities. And we brought them together and we used the ABCD model, for those of you familiar with that, which is the asset-based community development model. And we went through processes of looking at where do we begin this work? How do we build on assets in the community? And from that, the residents that participated, they agreed with two of the focus areas that we had come up with as a group, but they also came up with a third that we had not even talked about, was not on our radar, and that was the importance of community connectedness. And that was so fascinating to us, and even more fascinating now, having gone through a pandemic and the Surgeon General's new report about people feeling isolated, loneliness. So it was really very insightful and really makes the case for why it's so important to kind of come out of our own little world and really listen to the residents. During the pandemic, our resident engagement and convenings obviously had a shift. They came to a bit of a halt, but we felt we really had a great foundation for addressing the pandemic. We were all around the table, we all trusted each other, and we came up with very creative, innovative ways to really address the pandemic. For example, you know, someone needed information in Russian and people came up with, we can do that. We have translators. We had to figure out, how do we get testing out? How do we get vaccinations out? We were doing it at food pickups with the food bank. So there was just on the ground this collective approach, which again was able to happen because we had done all of that early work. And now we're in a process of listening again and getting our resident input once more. Next slide. So I'm going to do this deeper dive. This is what I'm going to talk about mostly today, our resident engagement strategies. And as I mentioned, pre-pandemic, we had these community connector meetings, and we also did a lot of resident outreach, you know, again, food pickups, low-income housing complexes, et cetera. During the pandemic, again, we had a shift. We, as everybody did, and we still did resident outreach, meeting them where they are. We also, and I'm going to talk about these three things that we did. We also did some resident mini grants, and we had some resident ambassador programs. So the resident outreach, again, it happened where they are. We went to food pickups, low-income housing. et cetera. And I'm going to go to the next slide and talk a little bit more about our resident mini grants. So basically, we created a very simple application process. We put it out there, and through our partners and through our relationship with residents, we got these requests for grants out there. And we asked them, what do you think your community needs? You know, based on our identified focus areas, as well as thinking about how to do this during a pandemic. And we were able to award 5 $500 mini grants to support different projects. And you can find the summary of these projects on our website via the QR code. But just to give you a little bit of taste, they were very local solutions. For example, we had a local ESL teacher who was serving parents in our targeted neighborhoods, and all of a sudden they had to switch to online teaching. So to maximize engagement, she provided food baskets with as to the ESL students, and they were able to keep engagement greater. They were cooking during their classes as she was teaching. We had local farmers that were delivering food to, as part of one of our community clinics, Food is Medicine program for diabetics. And again, so they could use the food as part of the teaching and keep engagement in their program. Next slide. So just a little bit about our resident ambassadors. And again, these were kind of collective programs. So the Health Education Council was involved, but so were many of our partners around the table. We had COVID-19 youth ambassadors. This was funded by Partnership Health Plan of California. And they are our sole Medi-Cal provider in Yolo County. And they funded multiple partners around our table to address COVID-19. And that really helped also, and it helped connect all of the work that was happening on the ground. But this was a training program for 17 to 24-year-olds. They were paid to participate. They developed their own projects, and it was all about increasing education and advocacy for the COVID-19 vaccine. And it was, you know, learning opportunity for them. And nearly 50 projects were completed in the communities, and they included things like music videos and community events and so on. We also have, and this has been ongoing, community food ambassadors. And these again are individuals in our targeted neighborhoods. And they are, this project is led by the Center for Land-Based Learning, which is one of our partners in our ACH. And they represent local agriculture in Yolo County. And this program, these residents are trained. They help with a mobile food market that was also a collaborative project that launched from our ACH that goes to these low-income communities to bring produce, fresh produce from local farmers to these different communities. And these food ambassadors, they go through a training program, they're educated around nutrition, they're paid, and they support the local mobile market. And I will move on to the next.
Yep, and we have just a minute left or so, Peggy.
Oh, I'm like really right on time. I probably talk too fast, but I'm right on time. So our next phase of work really is about institutionalizing resident leadership now that we're on the other side of this pandemic. And we want to convene resident leaders. We want to establish a resident advisory group that actually are paid to participate, like the rest of us are all paid to participate around the table. And we have put that in our budget with our new CACHI grant. And we will continue also, not just working with the leaders, but outreaching where they are. And our purpose is really also, our counties in California are going through their health improvement plan process and implementation. And how can we support the county? How do we leverage the work they're doing, not duplicate? How do we, again, think about how to increase impact of us all working together in a collective way. And I will leave it at that, so I don't take up more time. And I will, again, thank you. You can contact me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peggy. And we have some exciting questions already in the chat, so we'll be circling back to those soon. But thank you for those who are thinking through, asking for additional clarification and assistance on things. We are going to transition to our third panelist, just for the sake of time here. John Chapman is the Executive Director of Thriving Together NCW. Which is formerly known as North Central Accountable Community of Health, an organization committed to ensuring all people and places in North Central Washington have the opportunity to thrive, no exceptions. John joined Thriving Together NCW in 2016 as the program manager for the Washington State Innovation Model Grant, and later took on the role of deputy director. He spent the last 3 years supporting operations, program management, contracting, finance, all the great things that go along with the work of an accountable community. Prior to working at Thriving Together NCW, John Chapman worked in clinical management at Peace Health St. John Medical Center in Longview, Washington, as well as corporate and employee wellness programming. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to hear more about your work.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you everyone for joining today. My hope and goal today is to talk a little bit about how we help achieve ingredient 1 of the secret sauce. So you guys can decide by the end of the presentation if I actually did that or if I missed the mark. But I'm going to share a little bit about our organization's journey and then a specific example on really how we're trying to really build that community engagement. If you go to the next slide. This just gives you an example of our accountable community of health region, and you can see we're one of the larger regions in the state of Washington. We are also one of the more rural regions. And, I always use the word rural lightly because I think depending on where you live in Washington or California, your perception of rural may be significantly different. And even in our Okanagan County, I think the term frontier comes up more than even rural, whereas rural is just too urban for the area that they actually reside in. So I was presenting at a presentation last week, and what I would always encourage people to do is actually drive in a rural region. Go out and visit it and see what it is like when your potential access to care or services may be an hour away. So that is just my pitch for rural, and I hope you guys think about coming out. You're always welcome to come visit our region. Next slide. So our organization really started out with the focus of healthcare transformation. And we really looked at changing how our mission and vision worked as we were getting through the original waiver work that the state was doing. So we are focused on addressing whole person health and health equity across our region. And we really do this by bringing people together and organizations together to identify those who are really struggling and suffering in our region and working with those organizations in our region to identify how we can best serve and collaborate together to achieve really creating a place where all people and places can thrive. If you go to the next slide. And so really you can see, our vision is a place, no matter who, no matter where, whether frontier, rural, urban, everyone has an opportunity to thrive, and we develop systems and processes that help address the unique needs of everyone in that region. In 2022, we actually adopted a framework called the Vital Conditions, and you can see that on the right side of the screen. And so we are really working to move our community and our partners to really looking at how we address those vital conditions that really improve the health and well-being of our residents, that really help us strive to move this work more upstream. We also recognize, though, that those who are struggling and suffering the most are also still in need of some of those most immediate and urgent services. So we recognize that no matter what we do, it's always going to require a balance of that. Next slide. I think the primary thing I would like to state and share about this is our goal is really to work alongside partners. We as Thriving Together aren't a direct service provider, and we don't do anything directly or provide any services to the residents, but we're really here to work with those who are providing those services to figure out how we can build capacity, how we can support collaboration, and how we can move this work along better together. Next slide. Starting to get a little bit more specific, in 2021, our board actually adopted what we called our 3 pillars to change. And you see them up here on the screen, but really specific today, I'm going to really focus on pillar number 1, which is build through inclusive process of distributed leadership. And you can go to the next slide as I chat. And I know, we are always really good in this space to find different terminology and jargon to explain what we are trying to do. But really, to the crux of it is how are we engaging to the best degree those who are really impacted by the services that we are providing? How are we ensuring that they have the power and ability and authority to be part of the decision-making process? How are we giving them the tools to be able to do that in a way that is truly meaningful? How do we make sure that when they do that, their voices are heard? There are a lot of times where a lot of collaboratives have done this in well-intentioned ways and really attempted to do this, but sometimes it kind of falls short. And, I think you've probably heard this through a number of speakers, but a lot of times it's really investing in the process that is very, very important in this stage, and making sure that you take the time to do that, which, to the sad degree of all this, is not traditionally funded through a lot of those traditional funding sources. A lot of times funding sources fund those specific things and projects to get work done. So to find ways that we can fund and support true meaningful community engagement is important. Next slide. So the specific work I want to share is work we did with a behavioral health work group and community group across our 4-county region. So our region recognized that behavioral health was a major issue. This had come into play from the multiple years that we have done working with community partners on behavioral health improvement work. And so we actually worked with our board to identify it as a primary focus over the next couple of years of our organization. And our board actually allocated about $1.5 million to dig into different processes that we could do this work. So then with that, what we were tasked to was bringing the partners together to figure out how do we best achieve and move this work along, utilizing the high priority and vision of our organization. So we brought together a group called Evolving the Behavioral Health Series for about a 5-month process. And this series included individuals from 50 different agencies, and some individuals that were also, individuals with lived experience, or even parents who had children with lived experience as well. So we were really focused on how do we get the different inputs and the different perspectives from across the region. So again, lived experience, parents with lived experience. We really put a lot of focus on getting those service providers who were the ones directly providing the service. So not even the manager of a behavioral health or community organization, but the care coordinator of the behavioral health or community organization who every day interacts with the residents that we are trying to impact their health. And then we did also have management as well to provide differing levels of perspective. If you can go to the next slide. The one thing I would state when you do this and you're bringing these different perspectives together is And in any community group, it's important to center on why we're here and why we're doing this collectively. So before partners really dove into this work, they spent some time focused on the why. And so you can see up here on this screen what the why was for this behavioral health work group. And so the work group existed in order to improve our relationships, communication, and shared problem solving, and evolve the North Central Washington behavioral health system with effective coordination, sustainable strategies, and accountability among agencies. So part of this was formed, in the original intent is our board had allocated funding to do this work. And some of the thought was bringing partners together to figure out how we disperse these funds. When you look at this why statement, you really don't see anything about the funds in the why statement. So I call that out really because we started this with one intent, but when you brought the individuals together, true intent really came out of what they really wanted to get out of this group. And, figuring out what to do with the funding is just a component of it. But overall, how we're continuing to bring partners together and the value add to this work is much different than what that original intent was. If you go to the next slide. This just gives you a little flavor of the different individuals that were involved in this work group. A few things that I would really call out that was a focus, and we continually have to build over this, is we had partners who we invited to the table to be part of this discussion, who in the first meeting, they were wondering why they were here and how they were connected with behavioral health issues. And a key example of that is you'll see we had librarians from our North Central Washington Regional Library System. So, typically you think of a librarian as an individual who is, dealing with books, library system, education piece, right? But our libraries are warming centers during the winter, cooling centers in the summer, safe place for people to go when they don't know where else to go. And so they are intersecting with individuals of all ages with behavioral health issues, and very important to ensure they understand what that was. And they actually have become a vital partner in this work moving forward. We recognized we needed to create space and tool to provide those who may not feel confident to enter these conversations to be able to provide input. There's a lot of us who have been doing this for years and are experienced and feel confident in this. When you bring a parent advocate or an individual with lived experience, or even a frontline worker who doesn't get to have these conversations day in and day out, you can't just assume we can jump into this. We really have to provide those resources to them to make sure that they have the capacity to do this work. The other thing is we recognize that not every organization and individual was ready for this process. For those traditional individuals in this space, they felt like we were moving too slow. And we even had a few individuals we had to have conversations with because they had told us that we had the wrong people at the table. And when they said wrong people at the table, what they meant is, well, you don't have the CEOs and the directors and the decision makers of each organization at this table. So you're not going to be able to get anything done if you don't have anyone who can make a decision. Which again, is part of the process of figuring out how do you engage those organizations so that they can empower their staff to be part of the decision-making process and work alongside them in that. You can go to the next slide. I covered some of the basis of this, but again, the drive is really focused around, our board allocated and said this is a priority, but we really gave it to the community to figure out how we get it done. And that, I would say is the biggest thing. And when we think about how we engage in this work, ensuring that even our organizations truly understand what it means to distribute decision-making and community-led processes is very important. Go to the next slide. This just gives you a little bit of an example of the process we did in making decisions. What I would call out on here is really you still have a meeting focused on building relationship and trust as we're figuring out how we make decisions, understanding the current system, and every group needs to set its own norms. Even if we've been in these processes before, when you have a new group coming together, you always need to focus on establishing your own norms as a group. Next slide. you can see some of the outcomes or the decisions that were made by the group. What I would really say here is it's a little over the board from preventative services to still acute services. You're never fully going to get it away, no matter who you bring to the table, on individuals still interested in addressing those urgent acute services that are in front of them. One other thing I would call out is the ability of us being a broader collaborative. You'll see the NCW Connect website on here. And so this group identified this as a need. The great thing about it is there are other partners in the region working in conjunction with us to address that need. And so this was a great opportunity to say, hey, we don't need to do this ourselves. We can, work with this other group out there and feed our information to them as they build this out. And then next slide. And then here's just a few lessons learned from this process to share. It is always going to be difficult talking about issues of upstream. Like I said, the urgent services are right in front of you, and those are the things that tug at the heart that people want to address. I would say decisions are still influenced from the few individuals in the room. Even though we had a variety of individuals across the community representing this work, I would never say that just bringing representatives from different communities means that you're fully community driven in the decision-making process. Everyone brings their experiences, but there's still just a smaller group in the room trying to figure it out. So how we drive and continue to make this really community driven decision-making is always going to be a work in progress. Individuals don't buy into the bottom-up approach, and that's always going to be a continual conversation. And the last one I would really share is we really need to support leaders in how they can distribute decision making. Our board has really leaned into this and really taken that risk. But even with the funding allocations, they still have a fiduciary responsibility to that. So we are asking them to let go of autonomy and control while still maintaining accountability. And we have to support them in being able to do that. Go to the next slide. And I think that is it. And I hope I made my 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate it. So fabulous to hear how you all are kind of shifting that model and really trying to change power dynamics by shifting decision-making more to the community. So thank you so much. Again, if you have questions for John or any of the other panelists, continue to put those in the chat. We do have one last presenter before we'll open up for a little bit of discussion. We have here Jessica Osborne-Stacknes which is the Chief Operating Officer at the North Coast Health Improvement and Information Network, which is part of the Humboldt Community Health Trust. Jessica holds a bachelor's in English and a master's in health sciences and has provided strategic leadership for a number of cross-sector collective impact initiatives in Humboldt County, including Aligning Forces for Quality, which is the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded initiative, the Humboldt Community Health Trust, North Coast Care Connect, and others. Her passion is to work on system transformation efforts to improve the health and well-being of the community in which she was born and raised. She also really likes to hike with her husband and her dogs. Thank you so much, Jessica, for being here today. We're excited to hear from you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with everyone, and hello from Humboldt County. I'll echo John's welcome invitation to drive through rural. I'm biased, but I think Humboldt County has one of the most particularly lovely drives through rural, the Avenue of the Giants, and certainly offers some good opportunities for hiking with or without your dogs and spouse. So I feel very honored to be here among colleagues today and talk about some of the work that has emerged from our Accountable Community for Health in Humboldt County, the Humboldt Community Health Trust, yes, and Sasquatch, so can't discount that, Bigfoot sightings. I thought a lot about the sort of 3 signal activities that support alignment and where those were taking place in the context of our ACH work. And in truth, I'm really seeing some of those efforts advance related to one of our core strategies of our ACH, which is establishing a community information exchange. So I'm going to just share with you a couple practical strategies that we used in Humboldt to support inclusive co-design arrangements and an inclusive decision-making practice. Next slide. It's just a very high level background on our organization, the North Coast Health Improvement and Information Network Engine. started in 2010 in response to meaningful use, really with a focus on health information exchange. 2015 added a second eye to our focus around community health improvement. Really started to work in earnest in 2016, 2017 around cross-sector data sharing, established the Humboldt County Accountable Community for Health in 2016 with a number of community partners. And since about 2018, I've been working on launching our community information exchange out of our ACH effort. Next slide. So Peggy talked about this a little bit earlier, Stephanie at the top. We feel so fortunate to be among a cohort of ACHs in California through the California Accountable Community for Health Initiative, CACHI. You can see Humboldt in the northernmost corner of the state there, one of 13 awardees, though we know that this is expanding to a number of other communities across the state. I still think we have the honor of being sort of the northernmost county. And just to set context about Humboldt County in general, you know, we are considered a rural county. I think parts of our county are considered frontier territory. We have about 130,000 folks in our community, but spread over a very significant landmass. So, you know, our county is actually sort of equivalent to the size of Rhode Island. And then there's sort of the component of geographic isolation that happens in our community. So very often growing up, there would be sort of no way in or out of the county during really stormy winter weeks. So couldn't go north, couldn't go south, couldn't fly out, had a hard time getting east. And in fact, at points, people refer to Humboldt County as being sort of locked behind the redwood curtain. And I guess I just sort of surfaced that to say that there's this natural point of sort of cooperation that emerges when you're in a geographically isolated area. You have a good sense of who your partners are, you have a good sense of who your competitors are, and you know you're interreliant on each other to survive. And actually, I think that creates a really good foundation for collective impact initiatives in a locality. I'll just share that when our ACH kicked off, we had sort of a focus on addressing substance use disorder with a very holistic perspective, all the way from ACEs and trauma mitigation to supporting harm reduction and recovery. I think as our Accountable Community for Health has matured, we've really started to think about, you know, how do we use the ACH as a vehicle to really try and enhance system access, support integration across community partners, and overall coordination of our local system. Next slide. So that gets us to sort of one of our key initiatives through the ACH, which is to establish a community information exchange. And I think that this is a term of art that comes out of San Diego 211, who I certainly think of as sort of the national leaders in this space. In fact, they're holding their national summit as we speak. And folks are starting to become more and more familiar with this term. But essentially what a CIE is it's a network of partners that are using a shared technology platform that usually does pretty similar functionality depending on the vendor you're going with. So things like resource directory, closed loop referral system, the ability to do individual care planning, the ability to do shared assessments or data gathering across a population of people, the ability to coordinate across organizations in a community around a shared client, and of course, the ability to try and understand and track outcomes as a result of that sort of shared intervention. And I just sort of want to highlight the community part of community information exchange, because that's something we've really taken to heart in Humboldt County. We really believe that, you know, this work goes forward when you have a network of partners that are committed to really creating an enduring structure that's going to change the way a system operates together for the health and population of the community that you serve. So the sort of community part is very central to our values. Our community information exchange is called North Coast Care Connect. That's a screenshot of the demo site of the platform. We use the vendor name patch, and we've been at work on this since 2018, but the system has been live in Humboldt since 2022, and we're currently sort of scaling our network actively as we speak. Next slide. So I'm certain that the Accountable Community for Health was an absolutely formative table for getting to the point of CIE. And it's taken a lot of additional sort of iterations and planning process to get to where we are today to a live spot. But what I want to really talk about in earnest is our co-design process, which is a place where we decided to sort of slow down, go more inclusively together in order for sort of greatest impact in the future. And I think it's a example of how you can start cultivating inclusive processes. Next slide. So we had spent the better part of 3 years getting ready to launch a CIE in Humboldt County that had included leadership buy-in from anchor institutions in the community, our governance committee for the Humboldt Community Health Trust. It included raising funds to develop the CIE out of the community itself, and a whole bunch of community discovery interviews, talking to every single organization we could think of that might use the CIE to try and understand what were the benefits in their perspective, the drawbacks, the barriers. And we got to the point where we really felt like there was good interest from the community and a good pathway ahead to start embarking on this work. And at that point, we decided to take a pause and really think about how we could bring folks into the inner circle of co-designing and planning the system together. So we made a really intentional approach for a 10-week co-design process. The process would kick off with a kickoff meeting with about 30 partners there. We use that meeting to really say, like, here's our shared objectives together. Here's our anticipated timeline. We know this is somewhat aggressive. We want to see what we can do over the course of the summer because we're, sort of slowing the overall process down to bring folks in. And we also, at that kickoff meeting, established a decision-making process that we'll talk about in a couple of slides from here. We broke up into 3 different work groups that would have various aims as part of the co-design session, and those groups, data and use case, operations, and legal, met weekly over the course of the summer via Zoom. And then we also had some ad hoc processes in place where we might round on individuals if they missed a meeting, or maybe there was a concern surfacing that we needed to attend to, or do individual consultations with someone if they were a content expert in an area. And then we also engaged a couple of consultants to help us with the process. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of who participated. We did have over 30 participants, which is fairly sizable for us in a small community. We worked very hard to have a variety of different partners engaged and in the room, folks that represented different organizations, different sectors, different populations in our community, including residents. It was really important to us that we didn't have a sector or a key player in the room really driving the conversation. If we're talking about a community information exchange system, that needs to work really well for our large integrated health and human services, as well as it works for our small grassroots family resource center. And so we worked really hard to both cultivate that diversity of perspectives, but also create a level playing field where each of those partners felt important and engaged and empowered to bring their perspectives forward in order to shape the overall system. Slide. And then we worked very hard at trying to just foster inclusive participation overall, right? And I will admit, I was super daunted by the prospect of this co-design process. First of all, it was the height of COVID. Second of all, we were running these meetings over Zoom in the middle of in the summer. And I was super concerned about the ability to sustain folks' engagement, frankly, through this process and in an inclusive way. And we had a really exceptional consultant that helped us shape some strategies to support that inclusive participation. So you can see some examples of that on the screen there. But in order to just sort of pick out a few of those items, I will say, we just sort of named from the beginning about how ambitious we knew the timeline and the objectives were. And we started talking about that with our participants. I will say that, and I'll give another example of this in a moment, that we had to do some give and take around timeline and objectives, especially as it came to attending to issues around equity issues. our participants said, yeah, this is ambitious. Yeah, we're trying to do a lot in a short amount of time. And when we need to pause and really unpack things, we should pause and really unpack things. And so I think that was a good dialogue and sort of collective decision that we came to in order to feel good about the work that was moving ahead, and not that we were just sort of going through the motions and rubber stamping activities. I'll also say that our decision-making process that we established at the outset of the co-design session really helped foster that approach too. Okay, next slide, please. So here's the decision-making approach that we adopted. Our Humboldt Community Health Trust, or Accountable Community for Health Governance Committee, or leadership team, has been using this decision-making process for many years, and it's called a level of agreement cards. You may have seen them in your local collaboratives, and usually they come with a green, yellow, red, and white card. You can sort of see what those cards mean. So as a way of voting, you say green, which is yes; yellow, any sort of additional discussion; no, I'm strongly opposed; white, I'm abstaining. And what it does is it allows people to sort of either virtually by raising their card or just saying the word, like unpack that, hey, we need to slow down, we need to discuss this further, yellow, or red, I'm really opposed. We can't let this conversation go forward without understanding what the barriers were. So we broached this approach with the co-design work group, and they said, this is great, and we are going to need to really slow down at points through this to try and unpack and understand equity concerns. So can we enact a purple card when that comes into place? So this is the approach that we used. The purple card did get used quite a few times through the course of the initiative, and certainly for the betterment of the overall work. So our data work group was thinking about demographic data that was going to be in the platform. And several folks enacted the purple card to ensure that we had very broad representation of gender expression as part of demographics in our platform. Similarly, Humboldt County, it is on the unceded territory of many ancestral tribes in our area. And so they really wanted to ensure that local tribal membership could be captured in the context of the platform, sort of surfacing that equity card. We had an operations work group that was thinking about partner inclusion, and the equity card got flashed so that we could talk about what does it look and feel like to have law enforcement partners participating in our system? Do we need to think about what that feels like for marginalized clients whose data might be in there? So ended up being a very successful practice overall. Next slide. So just kind of go quickly through these because I know we're running down on time here, but I think the benefit of the co-design was the quick transition into a ongoing shared governance practice for the CIE overall. That value has really carried through in terms of a distributed leadership practice, a sense of community ownership over the CIEs. Go to the next slide, please. You can see what our governance structure looks like for our CIE. There's still that sort of relationship to the ACH and the Humboldt Community Health Trust Governance Committee, but a lot of the day-to-day decision-making, policy setting and similar is happening at the steering committee level, which is a very diverse stakeholder group. Next slide. And again, you can see where there is a sort of strong intentionality in including a wide variety of community partners in this process. Next slide. So the steering committee for the CIE continues to use that decision-making practice moving forward. They are one of the most engaged groups. When I think of collective impact initiatives, when I think about distributed leadership, I think about this group and how much ownership and creativity and support they bring to the CIE collectively across the across our community. An example of that, we had to develop a fee schedule for our community information exchange because we want to be, sustainable into the future and not constantly looking for grant funds to support our work. And our steering committee both, represents leaders, ambassadors, folks that are the cheerleaders of the CIE, but also people that are going to be purchasers of services as well. So the ability to sort of walk that line of like, okay, what's reasonable? What can my program afford? What can our community partners afford? And what is needed for the health and well-being of the CIE into the long term? And I think their work around adopting and developing that fee schedule is really, really indicative of their participation in the process. Next slide. So everyone needs a hero. One of mine is my former colleague and mentor, Martin Love. He had this quote on his wall for many years, and I think it's so applicable to the work and the space that we are in ACHs and other aligned initiatives. But collaboration is not easy, but it certainly advances our work together and meaningfully. So appreciate the time to be here with you all today and chat about our work.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We are going to transition to a few minutes here of some question and discussion. I know people have been putting things into the chat and we've had some responses from our panelists today, but I do want to circle back to a little bit at the beginning. I know we had some questions initially to Peggy on community member engagement. What does that process look like to include local community members? Is that difficult to decide who is representative of your target community? How do you all do that?
Well, the way we did identifying the community connectors was through our partners around the table. We have a lot of very community-based organizations, you know, community clinics, parks programs that are working with kids and families. And we basically asked them to identify who these connectors were and to actually do a personal invite to those individuals. We do recognize that it's not perfect, and the same names do keep popping up, which makes you feel like you're on the right track. But that's why we also feel you have to have a more comprehensive approach and different strategies. And that's why we're also out talking to people at food banks and at low-income housing complexes and at other places where people in our neighborhood convene. The Health Education Council has a walking group of parents at the local elementary school. So we have lots of access. I think it is the one big advantage of being in a city, not a huge county or multiple counties. And within that city, knowing where those particular neighborhoods are that we really are focusing in on. So it is likely easier for us than those dealing with bigger geographies.
Thank you so much, Peggy. And I know we have a question lingering. Do any of our other panelists want to speak to that at all? Okay. I know that we have a question for Jessica still in the chat. I know you were thinking about responding there. So I don't know, Jessica, if you want to speak up about that, just on the data and the approach to that. The question was from Nicholas here. Are there trackable data points or outcomes for the community information exchange model / approach? This is the first time they've heard about it. Super exciting. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas. I was just typing to you. There are, and I think that's one of the beauties of these systems is that there's ability to do some customization around what's sort of meaningful in your community, right? We know some California communities are really looking at this model for their work around ACEs aware. Others might be thinking about it related to populations that are housing insecure. We have been thinking a lot about outcomes related to social determinant of health indicators, as well as just service disposition and access to services in our community. And I think those are sort of longer term goals for us to aim for. In the meantime, as we're just working on scaling our network, we're really just looking at some process measures right now. How engaged are programs in the platform? How actively are they using it? How many clients are enrolled? Those sorts of things. But I believe there's a lot of dexterity in the data that you can capture here. Appreciate the question.
Thank you. And for my two California sites here, are either of you all looking at CalAIM and how that all fits into things?
Yes. And I'm not sure we have completely figured it out. In Yolo County, our one Medi-Cal provider sits at our table. And I think sees being part of the collaborative as an advantage in terms of some of the newer components that they are required to do. And our group has sort of also looked at what are new focus areas and how do we tie that into the new kind of social focus areas that Partnership Health Plan has identified, so that we're kind of supporting that. So we are looking at new focus areas like housing and security and mental health, which ties very much to the social connectedness anyway. So anyway, I'm rambling a bit, but it's still a process.
Yeah, I'll say, yes, we very much are both wearing the ACH hat and then the CIE hat. At a really granular level, we're really closely watching what's happening around enhanced case management and community supports through CalAIM, and really thinking about how our HIE and CIE systems can be operationalized to better support those partners. Again, advantage of rural area and sort of knowing the colleagues and perhaps contracted providers that are going to engage in that work and thinking about what infrastructure exists in our community and how it can be enhanced to support them. At the ACH level, I just think a lot of the state initiatives that are happening right now, CalAIM aside, are just very ripe for sort of that integrated backbone body that ACHs and collective impact initiatives offer. So certainly in that regard too.
Absolutely. Well, I know we are at time today. I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists so much for your engagement, and thank you to all that have attended and added things in the chat. I know you probably have to jump, but we have included in the chat an evaluation if you have a moment to be able to do that. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've really appreciated time with you. Sue, did you want to close out on one other note as people are leaving more?
Sure. I don't know if we want to pull up a screen or not, but I encourage you to come to our last in the series session, which it looks like there is a link for that. We also just want to name the fact that we are forming a multi-sector collaborative innovation network, and we are launching that through the Fill Up Your Cup. These are 30-minute kind of come together. Laura Houston is clapping. That's funny. Really, just in this work that we do, we recognize how hard it is. It's very isolating and it's very rewarding. So we're, truthfully, we're piloting this to just bring together a short amount of time to really hear from people and what is it that they're most needing and wanting from each other. So we're excited, and I think we will. We've got the registration that Becca, thank you, Becca, has put into the chat, and the first one is July 13th from 2 to 2:30. So welcome. Yes, Chris. Okay, sorry, everything's going fast. So thank you so much. I know we are over, and a big shout out to our presenters. And I'm very, very grateful for all of your time in preparing and reflecting for today.